everybody. It's Tony George along with my good buddy Griffin Murphy from the Las Vegas Strip down there. And we're talking Hoops Happy Hour. And Griff, here we are. We are in the conference finals. We're in the Final Four. And right now, at least on the surface, out of the gate, the underdogs are kind of barking a little bit. As a matter of fact, Dallas bit last night in an upset, perceived upset of the T-Wolves on their home floor, shot over the total just barely, 108-105 final, total was 207. And, of course, the Boston Celtics with an overtime scary win against Indiana. They opened up this morning. Well, this morning when I got up at 4 a.m. to do everything else, they were at 9. Now they're down to 8.5. So there's a little love coming for the Pacers. It might have been a little bit too much for some people. Now, I guess we should preface this by saying on today's game, Griffin has the side and I have the total. Okay. Now, the last time that happened, we went down to Circa to watch the game, and Griffin won his side, and I got buried on my total, which happened to be a game of the year when Denver decided to score 70 points in an elimination game and pull their starters with 10 minutes left. So my night didn't go that well. Griffey's night, he had the T-Wolves. You look like a brain surgeon.
I did, but I also twisted them up in a parlay. I was also on that side with you, so I ate a little bit of crow myself, Tony. It went two ways on that one. We cashed one ticket, but we lost the other one. Never always pleasing, but you know what? We got the job done. But let's get back in here.
Well, I was $5,500 to twist it up. And I was, as you noticed, you hang around me enough to know that I don't take losses personally. But when they're an 8-unit play, I take them personally, and you were witness to that.
Oh, yeah, I was, Tony. Yes, I was. It never feels good, man, of course.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I just have stunk it up here the last 4 or 5 picks in the NBA postseason. I think I got a good read on this tonight. I did notice one thing in the game one was, they had a lot of problem up top with Indiana's pick and roll game without Porzingis in there. Horford is just a step slow, Griff, in that game, and they're taking advantage of that up top. I thought, again, I've talked about this, you and I doing these happy hour shows all season. Boston is not that well coached, and they got out-coached in that game, and they still won. They won based on sheer talent. Just have more talent on the floor than what Indiana. I don't think that's a question in any game that they play, that they have the best talent on the floor against any team in the NBA. Look at Dallas, 2-headed monster. Minnesota, 3-headed monster. Indiana, 2-headed monster. Boston, 5-headed monster with players coming off the bench. It's just that coaching, and that concerns me when we're laying this many points, Griff.
Yeah, Tony, I agree with you, but I will say with this Indiana Pacers team, you mentioned 2-headed monster. I see 3-headed monster, and what I've seen is obviously Haliburton all postseason long. He's been iffy back and forth because of those back spasms. Miles Turner really showed out as a player throughout the entire postseason, and then Pascal Siakam, I'm sorry, his name always messes with me. I see 3 guys. These are all 3 big body dudes. They're all very fast, athletic. They can all shoot, they can all score from the perimeter, and they can all clean up boards. So this Indiana Pacers team right now is actually in a good situation here. With Porzingis out, I mean, you nailed it right on the head. That was where I was going with this thing, is Indiana has a little bit of an advantage now with Porzingis due to the fact that on rebounds, they would have gotten destroyed on rebounds. But when you have 3 guys that can clean up in the paint, and you don't have Porzingis on Boston's side, on the defensive side, or getting those second chances for those layups, well, it can turn into a bit of an issue. We know how good Indiana's offense is. They're very fast. They have the highest tempo in all of NBA out of any team. Second in points per game, they finished off the season. Boston, on the other hand, they finished first in offensive ratings, and I want to say third in defensive deficiency. So it's going to be very interesting series. It's going to be a very interesting series in my eyes for this Boston Celtics team. I think they are going to have to rely heavily on Tatum and Brown, but most importantly, their game is going to be in the paint. They are going to have to figure out how to clean up rebounds. It's a good matchup for the Pacers. Boston, on the other hand, it's a little bit more so without Porzingis. Al Horford's really going to have to take a load in the paint, Tony.
Yeah, and he put in 39 minutes last game, and he ain't getting no younger. As a matter of fact, I think one of the best bets in this game, I'm going to give out a free pick for the Hoops Happy Hour, and I'm going to go under with Horford. He's sitting at 20 and a half on points, rebounds, and assists. Now, he put in almost 40 minutes last game, struggled. They beat him to the punch on the boards. He's just lost a half a step. And you could see that when you get to a high level, the postseason being a high level, I'm telling you, that's when losing a half a step means something. And, you know,
sure.
Indiana's youthful. Siakam, as you say, good player. They're quick. They're a little bit quicker. They were, at least in the paint. They were able to get in there and box out, get better positions. I know. And the thing of it is, when you talk about a three-headed monster, the problem with me saying it's a three-headed monster for Indiana is just the pure inconsistency of Halliburton and Turner. You know, they just don't.
Yeah.
You can't get 25 and 8 and 4 out of Halliburton and everything. Some games he had 6. One game in the postseason he had 6 points. You know, I mean, you got to count. You got to rely on a guy like that to at least be in double digits, in my opinion. And of course, Turner, he's the same way. He can have 20 and 12 one night. The next night he has 8 and 7. You know, and can't hit a free throw to save his ass. So, you know, that's the Boston could be inconsistent, but usually just on a single game basis. Now, bear in mind, Series 1 against Miami, Series 2 against Cleveland. In both those games, they got their rear end handed to them.
Yeah.
On their home floor. You would think that they would have learned from those experiences. You would think that this coach they have would be pounding that into their head all day yesterday, in the shoot around this morning, into the team late dinner at the hotel tonight. Hey, now listen, let's go. And one thing about the Pacers, they're 29 and 18 against the spread when playing an opponent that beat them the previous game. So there's some things that are going in Indiana's way. I still think if Boston shows up and plays to their potential, they can beat anybody by double digits. The line is fairly sharp. You know, I would have to agree with the line move just based on what I saw the first game. Indiana should have won it, but they might have blown their wad there too. So you got to worry about that aspect, Griff.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tony. I mean, in this series, this matchup, it's pretty straightforward and simple to me. It's who's going to shoot better from the perimeter. In the most recent game, Boston shot 33% from the perimeter. Indiana shot 37%. Indiana pounded them when it came to rebounds, and Boston still managed to capitalize on this victory. Looking back at the Pacers' last series against the Knicks, it was kind of a very similar situation. It was who's going to score the ball. I mean, Jalen Brunson obviously was detrimental on the defensive side for the Indiana Pacers, but that's a different team. Now you've got Tatum, you've got Brown, you've got Horford, who also bangs from the arc. If you could have these three guys, all three show out and actually score from the perimeter, you know what they've done all season long on the defensive side of the ball. You've seen what they've done on the offensive side of the ball, especially on rebounds. So this is going to come down to who's going to shoot sharper. And for me, Boston's proved it game in, game out, all season long. They went 37-4 at home this season. And the biggest thing for Indiana all year, they're struggling on the road. They went 21-10, or I'm sorry, 21-20, just one game above 500. So for me, who's going to shoot better from the perimeter is the biggest thing, and who's going to be in the paint scoring those second chance points. That's going to be the biggest thing for me in this one, Tony. We already know when it comes to fast break, Indiana's probably going to edge because they are a little bit faster. They like to move the ball a little bit better, but this game's going to come down to more of a controlled game because both of these teams move at very similar paces. Indiana does move faster, but due to the fact they do move at similar pace, it's going to control that, just like that most recent Dallas series. It was very OKC and Dallas. They moved. There was a game where they had the slowest pace tempo of play that has been played all postseason long. And those two teams are top 10 when it comes to pace of play. So going back to that, this is going to be another similar game for me. Who's going to clean up on boards and who's going to bang from the perimeter? Once again, it does hurt that Porzingis is out, but I still love the way that Boston is playing right now, and I just don't like Indiana on the road as of right now.
Horford's prop bet tonight for three-pointers made is 2.5. He averages 1.9 on the year. The under on that at, let me get DraftKings, minus 166. Over plus 140. So just FYI.
I see Al Horford from the perimeter today. They're going to use him deep. I like that over.
Well, there you go. And that's a plus 140 number, but I'm under on 20.5 points, rebounds, and assists. He averages 17 on the year. In his last 10 games, only 2 times has Al Horford exceeded points, rebounds, and assists. The last game he had 22 and he played 40 minutes. I think he's going to be a little more tired now. I see him not getting to that number, and that's minus 125-ish. Let's switch gears and go to tomorrow. Last night.
Sure.
I'll tell you one thing about Dallas. We all know about Luka Doncic. The guy is a friggin' rock star. He's going to have his. He's going to have his. He shines in moments like this. The guy is a one-man wrecking crew, and then it's kind of everybody else with them. However, when Irving has big nights, they're almost impossible to beat. Irving had 30 last night. If he has 25 or more, and Luka's doing what Luka does, they're a very difficult animal to tame, Griff.
Yeah, Tony, I know, I hear you on that, and they are one of those dynamic duo but you have to take game one of every single series as a little bit of a retro perspective type of situation, kind of backing off of it a little bit and kind of seeing how these teams are going to balance each other out on offensive player versus player and defensive player versus player. But you can't forget the fact of Rudy Gobert in the paint. You've got to remember Towns and Edwards, and remember in Game 7 against Denver, what Edwards and Towns did on the boards, on the points, everything in general. If you could have those three guys going into this postseason after the first set of round 1, Rudy Gobert was leading the entire postseason in rebounds. He was averaging 15 boards per game. If you can get that dynamic of those three guys, all going off in this, and you have a full potential with Luka and Kyrie, I'm still going with Minnesota all day long. It's Minnesota with Towns and Edwards. You've got two very young gunning kids who are chasing a ring. They're playing very hard basketball, and they just knocked off Denver, who won it all last year, had all the momentum rolling into winning again this year. Besides, obviously, you have Boston, who's in the East running things up and down the court, which I would suspect they're going to be in the finals. But going deeper right now, looking at this, I love the way that Minnesota compounds their offense. And when I look at player versus player, you're asking for a lot out of Kyrie and Luka in this series. So I like the way that Minnesota's playing, even despite the fact they lost their first game at home. That's nothing more. That's why their series are games best of 7, not just one game. So for me, nothing to it, nothing for me. I still love the way that this Minnesota team is playing right now, Tony.
Does it concern you? A couple of things here.
Sure.
It's damned if you do and damned if you don't. So with Dallas winning last night, they secured home court for the series.
Yeah.
Okay. So if it goes to a game 7, it's going to be in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
Also, so that's when, if it goes 7 games, that's when the fatigue factor may set in with 75% of your points and pretty much initiation coming from 2 guys for
Yeah.
Dallas, where I think the sum of all parts for Minnesota is much greater than what it is for Dallas.
I mean, this
With
is
only
a
really,
layup. This is a
yeah,
layup, Tony. Just look at what Minnesota just did to Denver. They beat them 3 times on their own home court, including Game 7. They went out and they showed that young gunning athleticism. It's the same type of situation. You've got Luka and Kyrie. Obviously, Luka's young, but Kyrie isn't. Kyrie's an old vet, and that is one of the guys that you are relying to. So if this goes to Game 7 and it's in Dallas, we already seen what Minnesota can do on the road and what their capabilities are. They're young, they're gunning, they're absolutely thrashed Denver at the home 3 times. So no, if this goes to Game 7 with Minnesota, I like Minnesota in this one. Yet we aren't there yet. So this is just analysis, just a preview of my thoughts. Once we get to Game 7, if that occurs, my thought analysis may be very much different. But right now, no concern by any means, Tony. We've already seen Minnesota beat that, and especially the climate change. Think about the altitude. They had to go to Denver. So that's just another slam dunk confluence to stack on top of Minnesota playing on the road against Dallas at home.
Yeah, I was a little surprised Dallas was 24% for 3-point range, 6 out of 25.
I'm looking at that now.
That raises a red flag. The rebounds, 48 for Dallas and 40 for Minnesota. So, and we've talked about this a million times. Those teams at this point in time in the season that win the rebounding war usually win the game.
Right.
The rest of it's white noise. So that's something Minnie's going to have to. And Towns did not look good last night. He couldn't hit a bolt in the ass handful of rocks. You could tell I'm a little bitter because I did lay the 4 with Minnesota last night, and I thought that they could get him in Game 1 there and secure home court. I think playing in that altitude, in Denver took a little bit out of them, even as young as they are. It always does. Sure. Altitude, that was a grueling game. Dallas outscored them 49-43 in the second half, and I think maybe you saw some of that fatigue setting in. Now, now, this line is Minnesota -5, total 207. They're not adjusting that total at all, Griff. Dallas is going to shoot better from the perimeter. Towns is going to play better. I think that might be a little suspect on the over. Again, I think that you'll see a Minnesota team that will not leave anything in the tank and throw the kitchen sink at it tomorrow to even it up at home. And Dallas is going to do what Dallas is going to do. If Irving scores 25 to 30, that'll go over.
Agreed. But I think the biggest thing for Minnesota this game is going to be, once again, as mentioned, we've talked about it over and over again, as rebounds. You're going to need Rudy Gobert to really step up, and you're also going to need Reed. Reed is going to have to be a guy that really cleans up in the paint, and he did not in his most recent matchup, and he's somebody that's really going to have to play well. The biggest thing for Minnesota is going to be on the defensive side, and all season long, they finished up number 1 in defensive efficiency. If you can stop one of the 2, Kyrie or Luka, in this series, you're going to dominate them. This is a good mismatch for Minnesota. They're a much better team across the court in my eyes. I think they have a much better team. They're much deeper. They have everything going for them. I just think that Game 1 was a slip-up, and as you mentioned, the fatigueness coming out of Denver and then coming into this game, getting beat down like they did second half, is just a pure example of fatigue. It's exhaustion, and that's exactly what we saw. Now this team's already got a taste of what Dallas is all about. We already know Minnesota has a team full of rock stars. I love the way they've played all season long. I think they're going to come in and dominate in this one. I think that over will go over. I mean, I think that total will go over, Tony. I like the over in this one. Just Minnesota's got to be better on the boards.
Yeah, both teams, 3-point range, Minnesota shot 49 threes and made 18 of them. I mean, that's 37%, which is Yeah, but and shot 43 overall. I just think you're going to see those numbers increase. Dallas at 49%. That might be a slight regression, but they gave them a lot of open looks. And I think Minnesota did a lot of things in that game that they regret. And I think they're well
Sure.
coached up enough and they're young enough to listen to a coach that they're gonna make some changes, in
Yeah.
this next game. I don't think in these series, either one of them, Boston or the Dallas series, we saw a lot of one team wins by 30 the next night, and the next game, the other team wins
Yeah.
by 30. I don't think
Hmm.
you're going to see a lot of that in either one of these finals. Neither one of these teams, I've said this a million times. I try and tell people, and I know I've been fallen from grace after a great regular season in the NBA. The playoffs have just crushed me. You and I were talking about
Sure.
this morning on a phone call we had, but then I couldn't be more pissed off about it than I am. But there was a lot of that flip flopping around, and I kind of try and think that at this point in time, you kind of take the best team. If you got a halfway decent number and you bet them, you're probably going to cover 65, 70% of the time. I mean, taking a lot of the guesswork out of it, but nonetheless,
Yeah.
I think you're going to see more consistency here and a lot better ball than you saw in the last series these two played in. There was just a lot of home road dichotomy stuff going on. I mean, Dallas has proven one thing about Dallas that scares me is they have proven in all of their playoff games they have no problem winning on the road.
Sure. Sure. I
And
agree with
that's
you. But going back to what you said when it comes to you're not going to see anybody regarding the 30-point differential. I wouldn't be surprised if we did. I wouldn't be surprised. I could see because of the depth of Minnesota and the depth of Dallas, if it was to happen, I think it would be Minnesota who rolls over Dallas and just cleans them up. And some type of defensive format where you figure out a way to stop Luka or Kyrie. That would be the detrimental aspect in my eyes, just because Minnesota they have way more depth, especially offensively. And if that does turn into the case, that's where we're going to start seeing these unders start to hit, because they will turn into blowout games where Towns and Edwards are scoring all the buckets. You got Rudy and Reed in the paint getting all the boards, and then they figure out a way to stop Luka or Kyrie. Well, they're just not going to score any points, and they could get beat by 30 points. So this is a good matchup for Minnesota in my eyes. Once again, bouncing back to game one, I think it was just a bad overall game for them. They shot terrible from the perimeter. They didn't play well. They got outboarded. It was just one of those games, and now they got a taste of what they're about. So for me, if that does be the case, turns into the case, I would say Minnesota would be that team that blows them out, and the under would hit in a turnout fashion. That's just how I think it would roll, Tony.
I would think that you would have said just the opposite. I would have think you said
Really?
Boston has the potential to blow, just because Boston could put up 135 to 145 on anybody if they want to. They really
When
can.
we've seen it.
And we
Mm-hmm.
saw we saw in that New York series serious lapses of defense and concentration by Indiana.
Yeah.
If that was a 120, 117 game or 103, 104 game tonight in Boston, it wouldn't surprise me. And it also wouldn't surprise me if it was 135 to 101 Boston, which
Yep.
is why I left the side play alone. Because just
I
if
mean,
you could just if Phil Jackson was coaching Boston, I'd lay any point spread they had at any point in
okay.
time. At any point in time, because they're that good. And they got a three deep rotation off the bench. White can kick in 25 at
Yeah.
any point in
I
time.
was going to say.
I mean,
Yeah.
they got guys, and Horford can have 20. I mean, and if they had Porzingis in there, I definitely would lay any number with them if they had a
Sure.
really, really good coach. They don't, and I think that's the only thing that's really holding them back from being an extremely dominant team this year in the postseason, in
Okay.
my opinion. I just could be
Yeah.
wrong.
And Bouncing back, though, if you don't remember, earlier in the season when Boston beat Indiana by 50 points, bouncing back to that, they beat them 155 to like 100 to 102. It was something like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean your explanation is 100% back. Boston has the capability of absolutely lighting anybody up, and if there was one team that would do that out of the 4 teams left, that would be who I would pick in a blowout fashion. Yeah, absolutely.
That game they beat them 155 to 108. Boy, I have a photographic memory. I got to pat myself on the back. Halliburton didn't play in that game. He was
Yeah.
out with
Okay.
injury,
Yeah.
but still, I mean, their leading scorer had like 20 points. They had a bunch of
Yeah.
guys with 6, 8, 7, 9. They sucked, and Boston was in a mood. Boston was in a mood, so we're just going to bury these dudes tonight. So anyway, over at Doc Sports, you can find the side from Griff, the total from me. If ever I was due to hit one after, I think I've dropped 4 in a row, 5 in a row, maybe. Hey, I tell it like it is.
Of course.
But we got those picks over there, Major League Baseball. We do have the finals in the NHL going on. A little bit of a surprise last night, just to touch on that Rangers game. I like the Rangers in a pick 'em on home ice. Those two are evenly matched, which you will find out in the postseason, especially in the NHL. When you get to this point, there should never be a team laying 150 or 160 in the Final Four in the NHL. And that was a 110 pick'em game. They couldn't even think about making a goal last night. A little bit of a 3-0 surprise there. And now you got Edmonton and Dallas going at it just for craps and giggles. Who do you think ends up in the Stanley Cup Finals?
I'm going Florida. I like Florida for sure. And I might sound crazy, but I got to say, I think that Edmonton and Dallas is kind of in a little bit of a mismatch. Last season, Dallas thrived on the defensive side. They were the best defense in all of hockey. This year, they're more of an offensive team. Well, now they're in a little bit of a mismatch situation because you have to think of the speed and athleticism that Edmonton has on the offensive side. And is Dallas's defense going to be able to keep up with that and sustain with that? So for me, I really like Edmonton here, and I like Florida. I know the Rangers are locked down at home, but the way Florida has ran through everybody throughout these playoffs, I mean, how do you back off of them? You can't. I'm not fading that team. They're playing very good hockey. I had them last night. They did obviously clean up. They're playing very good hockey. This is postseason hockey, and they have that energy. They have that atmosphere. They did it last season, and they ran through everybody, and I'm seeing them do it right now. And again, going back to the Dallas mismatch, Dallas is kind of in a crappier situation in my eyes. I think speed and athleticism is what's going to take Dallas out of this series, Tony.
Yeah, well, Ottinger, 3 out of his last 4 games, he's held his opponents to 1 goal. And by the way, Colorado's no slouch on offense either, so that was impressive.
No.
But the question is, can he keep it up? I don't know.
McDavid.
I've got a totals play in the. I got a totals play in that game tonight, folks, over at DocSports.com. He's Griffin Murphy. I'm Tony George. This is Hoops Happy Hour. I don't have a prop yet, but follow me on Twitter at TGeorgeSports, and I'll put up a free prop for this Dallas and Minnesota game tomorrow night on my Twitter account for you. Because I haven't really researched it. I'm still kind of reeling from last night and trying to get tonight's game figured out. Just really haven't taken a deep dive on it. I was surprised by a lot of things that I saw last night in that Minnesota game, to say the least. And I'm sure Griff was too, because we both were on Minnesota. We tell it like it is, but we'll give you a free $60 over at DocSports.com. There's a link on the right there. You see the address above us here. There's also a tab on the website. We'll park $60 and any new account. And hell, we may get together for happy hour at Circa tomorrow night and watch this Minnesota-Dallas game. I'm tied up tonight. I got to, do a spot on back in Lincoln, Nebraska. You want to see me on my old show, the Average Joe Sports Show, folks, hellvarsityradio.com, about 3:45 Pacific. Yeah, I'll be joining Chris Schmidt and Bill Dolman. Bill Dolman, who's a broadcaster for NBC for the Olympics. him and I and Chris Schmidt, who's now the lead host there, who used to be my intern on the Tony George show when I first started radio, and then an intern on the Average Show sports show, and then became a co-host and has worked his way up through the ranks to be a damn rock star broadcaster back there in Husker country. I'll be doing a spot tonight on the they shelved that show. And here about 15 years later, Bill Dolman, who used to be the voice of the Houston Rockets too, moved back to Lincoln, and they brought it up out of the dust. And lo and behold, they're bringing back the original OG tonight for a spot. It was a real popular show back in the early 2000s there in Lincoln. I hosted nightly, and we'll be doing a spot there tonight and probably talking some Husker football. Probably talking some Husker basketball. We're going to be talking a little NBA, and just maybe sharing some old stories from back in the day. We used to do live remotes from bars. And since I was not an employee of the radio station, so I could do whatever I wanted to do. So I was the only guy in the history of radio in Lincoln, Nebraska, when we had the athletic director at a live remote at Misty's Bar and Grill, where I told him he was an idiot to his face for firing Frank Solich on air.
Yeah.
Oh,
too
so
funny.
Nonetheless, look forward to that. Doc Sports, that's the place to be. Good luck here today and tomorrow, and you can find Griff and I over at the website. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.